voice, clothes from Target instead of Nordstrom. Cambria used to call it charmingly humble. Now she called it embarrassing. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded, her voice rising to that pitch that made our neighbor's dog howl. "It means you got exactly what you asked for." I walked upstairs to our bedroom, my former bedroom, and pulled out the suitcase I'd bought 3 days earlier. Cambria followed, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown timer. "You can't be serious," she said, watching me pack with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment. "You're throwing a tantrum because I won't let you control every aspect of my life?" "I'm not throwing anything," I replied, folding my shirts with the same precision I used to debug code. "I'm just accepting your terms." The truth was, I'd been watching Cambria for weeks, not in some creepy, obsessive way, in the methodical way I approached every problem. She'd been staying late at work, coming home with stories that didn't quite add up, and treating me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. The final piece of the puzzle had arrived yesterday, a credit card statement showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never seen, and a jewelry store that definitely hadn't provided anything for me. "My terms?" She laughed, but it sounded forced. "What terms?" "Independence, freedom, the right to do whatever you want without considering how it affects anyone else." I zipped up the suitcase and looked at her. "Congratulations, you've got all of that now." Cambria's face went through several expressions: confusion, anger, and finally, something that might have been panic. "You can't just leave. We have responsibilities. The mortgage, the car payments, the joint accounts I removed my name from yesterday, the credit cards I canceled, the utilities that are now entirely in your name." I picked up my suitcase. "Don't worry, you're a successful PR executive. You can handle it." This wasn't entirely true. While Cambria made decent money, she'd gotten used to our combined income funding her lifestyle. The house, the car, the shopping trips with her friends Trina and Lexi, all of that required 2 paychecks. But that was no longer my problem. "You're being ridiculous," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "We can work this out. We can go to counseling." "With what money? And more importantly, why would I want to?" I walked past her, down the stairs, and toward the front door. The smart home system I'd installed last year recognized my approach and disengaged the locks. In about 30 seconds, it would no longer recognize me at all. I'd spent the morning updating the access codes, removing my biometric data, and transferring ownership to a shell company I'd created. Cambria would figure out how to work the system eventually, or she'd hire someone to do it. Either way, it wasn't my concern. "Where are you going?" she called from the top of the stairs. "Somewhere I'm wanted," I said, and stepped into the rain. The beauty of planning your exit is that you can time it perfectly. I'd chosen 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, when most of the neighborhood was asleep but late enough that the chronic insomniacs would notice. Sure enough, Marla Goss, our HOA president and the neighborhood's unofficial gossip coordinator, was walking her ancient poodle when I loaded my car. "Evening, Orion," she called, her voice carefully casual. "Going somewhere?" "Moving out, Marla," I replied, loud enough for her to hear clearly. "Cambria and I are getting divorced." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Marla's eyes widened with the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery winners. This would be all over the neighborhood by breakfast. Cambria, who cared more about her image than her actual marriage, was going to hate that. "Oh my," Marla said, "I'm so sorry to hear that." She wasn't sorry. She was thrilled. Marla lived for this kind of drama, and I was handing her the story of the year. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the Vantons were finished, and they'd all want to know why. I drove to my brother Eli's place across town, where I'd been storing boxes for the past week. Eli ran a custom motorcycle shop and lived in the apartment above it. He'd offered me his couch without asking questions, which was one of the many reasons I preferred his company to most people's. How'd she take it? He asked when I arrived. About as well as you'd expect, I said, carrying my suitcase upstairs. She's probably calling her lawyer right now. Good luck with that, Eli said. You've been planning this for months. He was right. I'd been methodical about protecting myself, moving money, documenting Cambria's behavior, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation. But I hadn't been planning for what I'd discovered that morning, hidden in Cambria's home office. A folder labeled Vanton AI Project, containing printouts of emails between her and her boss, Victor Ralston. Victor was everything I wasn't: tall, loud, expensive suits, and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He was also married with a teenage son, which apparently wasn't stopping him from pursuing my wife. But the emails weren't just about their affair. They were about my work. For the past year, I'd been developing an AI security system that could revolutionize corporate data protection. It wasn't ready for market yet, but the preliminary code was worth millions to the right buyer. According to the emails, Victor had been pumping Cambria for information about my work, using their relationship to gain access to proprietary technology. So it wasn't just about romance. It was about corporate espionage wrapped in the affair. That was new, even for Cambria. I sat in Eli's kitchen, reading through the emails on my laptop. Victor's messages were a masterclass in manipulation, flattering Cambria while subtly extracting information about my work schedule, my clients, and my current projects. Cambria's responses showed she was more than willing to share, probably thinking she was impressing him with her insider knowledge. "You look like you ate a lemon," Eli said, bringing me a cup of coffee. "Worse," I said. "I found out why my wife really wanted her freedom." I showed him the emails. Eli read through them, his expression growing darker with each message. "This Victor guy," he said finally. "He's using her." "Yep. And she's too infatuated to realize it." "So what's the plan?" I closed the laptop and looked at my brother. Eli had always been the physical one, quick with his hands, ready to solve problems with direct action. I was the thinker, the planner, the one who preferred psychological warfare to actual warfare. But this situation called for both approaches. "First, we let them think they've won," I said. "Then we destroy them both." The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from Cambria and 43 text messages ranging from angry to desperate to threatening. I deleted them all without reading past the first few words. She'd made her choice. Now she could live with the consequences. My phone buzzed with a call from Red Morrison, my former colleague from the cybersecurity firm where I'd worked before going independent. Red had left corporate life to start his own consulting business, specializing in digital surveillance and corporate investigation. He was exactly the kind of friend I needed right now. "Heard you're back on the market," he said when I answered. "News travels fast. Your wife's been calling around trying to find you. Apparently she's discovered some financial surprises." I'd been thorough about extracting myself from our shared obligations. The house was in both our names, but the mortgage was now entirely Cambria's responsibility. Same with the car payments, credit cards, and the various subscriptions that kept her lifestyle running. Legally, I was in the clear. Ethically, I was giving her exactly what she'd asked for: complete independence. "She'll figure it out," I said. "She's a smart woman." "Smart enough to be having an affair with her boss?" "You know about Victor?" "I know about a lot of things," Red said, "including the fact that Victor Ralston has been asking questions about you around town. Questions about your work, your clients, your current projects." This confirmed what I'd suspected from the emails. Victor wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was using her to gather intelligence about my business. It was a violation of trust on multiple levels, and it gave me leverage I hadn't expected. "How much do you know about Victor?" I asked. "Enough to know he's got more enemies than friends. His PR firm has a reputation for playing dirty, and he's made a career out of stepping on people. He's also got a wife who doesn't know about his extracurricular activities." Yet. Yet, Red agreed. Want some help evening the playing field? I did, but first, I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. That meant surveillance, which meant getting close to Cambria and Victor without them knowing I was watching. The opportunity came 2 days later, when Marla Goss called to tell me about the neighborhood's annual charity gala. It was the kind of event Cambria lived for, a chance to dress up, network, and show off for the other wives in our social circle. This year, it was being held at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, and tickets were $500 per person. I know it's awkward timing, Marla said, but you already bought the tickets, and it would be a shame to waste them. I hadn't bought tickets. Cambria had, using our joint account before I'd closed it. But Marla didn't need to know that. I'll be there, I said. Wonderful. I'm sure everyone will be excited to see you. What she meant was that everyone would be excited to watch the drama unfold. The gala would be Cambria's first public appearance since our separation, and probably her first public appearance with Victor. It was going to be a spectacle, and I intended to make sure it was memorable. I spent the next 3 days preparing. Red helped me set up surveillance on Victor's movements, tracking his lunch meetings, his gym visits, and his late-night trips to hotels with my wife. We didn't need sophisticated equipment, just patience and a good camera with a telephoto lens. The pictures we got were exactly what you'd expect. Victor and Cambria holding hands in restaurant booths, kissing in parking garages, and checking into the same hotel room on multiple occasions. But the most interesting photos were the ones showing them with documents, papers that Victor studied while Cambria pointed to specific sections. She's briefing him, Red said, reviewing the images on his laptop. Look at this one. She's got what looks like technical specifications, and he's taking notes. It was worse than I'd thought. Cambria wasn't just having an affair. She was actively participating in corporate espionage. The woman who'd accused me of trying to control her was literally selling me out to her lover. The night of the gala, I put on my best suit, the one Cambria had bought me for our anniversary 2 years ago, and drove to the Fairmont. The hotel's ballroom was decorated in gold and white, with round tables surrounding a dance floor and a stage where local politicians would make speeches about charitable giving. It was exactly the kind of event where Seattle's elite came to see and be seen. I arrived early and positioned myself at the bar, where I had a clear view of the entrance. Red was stationed across the room, pretending to check his phone while actually recording everything through a discreet camera app. We'd planned this like a military operation, which seemed appropriate given what we were up against. Cambria arrived at 8:30, and she looked stunning. She was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, and her hair was styled in the kind of elaborate updo that required professional assistance. She looked like a woman who was winning at life, which made what I was about to do even more satisfying. Victor arrived 10 minutes later, and they made a point of not acknowledging each other immediately. Instead, they worked the room separately, greeting friends and acquaintances before gradually moving closer together. It was a practiced routine, designed to maintain plausible deniability while still allowing them to enjoy each other's company. I waited until they were standing together near the silent auction tables, examining a weekend getaway package to Vancouver before making my move. "Cambria," I said, approaching from behind, "you look beautiful tonight." She turned around, and for a moment, her face went completely blank. She'd clearly expected to never see me again, or at least not in public where she'd have to maintain her composure. "Orion," she said, recovering quickly. "I didn't know you were coming." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, then turned to Victor. "You must be Victor Ralston. I've heard so much about you." Victor was smooth. I'll give him that. He extended his hand with the kind of confident smile that had probably gotten him through 1,000 awkward situations. "Orion Vanton," he said, "your reputation precedes you." "Does it? That's interesting. What exactly have you heard?" Victor's smile flickered slightly. "Just that you're very talented with computers." security systems specifically. I specialize in protecting valuable information from people who shouldn't have access to it." The message was clear, and Victor received it. His handshake became slightly firmer, and his smile took on a competitive edge. "That must be rewarding work," he said. "It is, especially when I catch someone trying to steal something that doesn't belong to them." Cambria stepped between us, her PR training kicking in. "Gentlemen, this is a charity event. Maybe we should focus on the cause we're here to support." "Of course," I said, though I find it interesting how people's true motivations always come to light eventually. I excused myself and walked toward the restroom, knowing they'd need a moment to process what had just happened. Red followed me, and we met in the hallway outside the ballroom. "They're rattled," he said. "Victor's making phone calls, and your wife looks like she's seen a ghost." "Good. Let them worry." We returned to the ballroom, where the evening's program was beginning. The mayor gave a speech about community service, followed by the head of the charity explaining how the funds would be used. During the presentations, I watched Cambria and Victor. They were sitting at different tables, but they kept glancing at each other and then at me. When the formal program ended and the dancing began, I made my second move. I approached Colin Ralston, Victor's wife, who was sitting alone at a table near the back of the room. "Mrs. Ralston, I'm Orion Vanton. I don't think we've met." Colin was an attractive woman in her early 40s, with the kind of understated elegance that came from old money rather than new. She looked tired, which made sense if she'd been dealing with Victor's behavior for any length of time. "Mr. Vanton," she said, "I know who you are. I'm sorry about your marriage." "Thank you. Though I have to say I'm grateful for the clarity. It's better to know where you stand than to live in ignorance." Kellen's expression sharpened. "Clarity is important." "It is. For instance, I've recently learned some very interesting things about corporate espionage. Did you know that some people use romantic relationships to gain access to proprietary business information?" Kellen set down her wine glass and looked at me directly. "That sounds like something my husband would do." "Does it?" "Victor has always believed that the ends justify the means. He's very good at convincing people to give him what he wants." I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the photos Red had taken, Victor and Cambria kissing in a restaurant parking lot 3 days earlier. "I thought you should know," I said. Kellen studied the photo for a long moment, then looked across the room at her husband, who was now dancing with Cambria. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've been wondering where he's been spending his evenings. There are more photos if you need them, and documentation of some business activities that might interest your divorce attorney. I think that would be very helpful." I gave Kellen my contact information and returned to the bar, where Red was waiting with a whiskey. "Phase 1 complete?" he asked. "Phase 1 complete," I agreed. "Now, we wait for the fallout." We didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, Kellen approached Victor and Cambria on the dance floor. The conversation was brief but intense, ending with Kellen throwing her drink in Victor's face and walking out of the ballroom. The entire room went silent, then erupted in whispers. Cambria looked around desperately, trying to gauge how much damage had been done to her reputation. The answer was, a lot. By tomorrow, everyone in Seattle's social circles would know that Victor Ralston was cheating on his wife with Cambria Vanton, and that Orion Vanton had been the one to expose them. Victor, wiping champagne from his face with a napkin, looked directly at me across the room. His expression was pure rage, and I knew he'd be coming for me soon. I finished my drink and headed for the exit, satisfied with the evening's work. The real fun was just getting started. The next morning brought exactly the chaos I'd expected. My phone buzzed with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, reporters probably, or friends of Cambria wanting to know what had happened at the gala. I ignored them all and focused on phase 2 of my plan, financial warfare. Cambria had always been careless with money, assuming it would always be there when she needed it. She'd gotten used to our combined income covering her expensive tastes, and she'd never bothered to understand the details of our financial arrangements. That oversight was about to become very expensive. I spent the morning at my bank, closing the last of our joint accounts and transferring my portion to accounts that only I could access. The house was a more complicated issue. We were both on the deed, but I'd been making the mortgage payments from my business account. As of today, that was Cambria's responsibility. My lawyer, Janet Pierce, had been preparing for this moment since I'd first contacted her 3 weeks ago. Janet was a specialist in high-asset divorces, and she'd seen every trick in the book. She'd helped me structure my finances to protect my business assets while ensuring I met all legal requirements. "Your wife's attorney called this morning," Janet said when I arrived at her office. "She's demanding spousal support and claiming you've hidden assets. Let me guess, she wants to maintain her current lifestyle." "Essentially, yes. She's also threatening to sue for damages related to your abandonment of the marriage." I laughed. The woman who told me she'd do whatever she wanted is now claiming I abandoned her? "People say a lot of things when they're desperate," Janet said. "The good news is that we have documentation of her affair and evidence of the corporate espionage. That gives us significant leverage." The corporate espionage angle was particularly useful because it demonstrated that Cambria had been actively working against my interests while claiming to be a faithful wife. No judge would award spousal support to someone who'd been stealing trade secrets. "What about Victor?" I asked. "That's where things get interesting," Janet said. "His wife filed for separation yesterday, and she's claiming half of his assets. Since he's been using company resources to pursue his affair with your wife, his business partners are also asking questions. Victor's PR firm was a partnership, and his behavior was putting the entire company at risk. If clients discovered that he'd been using corporate espionage to steal trade secrets, the firm could face lawsuits and criminal charges. His partners were probably looking for ways to distance themselves from him." I left Janet's office and drove to Eli's shop, where Red was waiting with the results of his continued surveillance. Victor had spent the morning in crisis mode, meeting with lawyers and trying to control the damage from the gala incident. "He's scared," Red said, showing me photos of Victor leaving his attorney's office. "Look at his body language, shoulders hunched, checking over his shoulder, moving fast. This is a man who knows he's in trouble." "Good. What about Cambria?" "She's holed up in the house, probably trying to figure out how to pay the mortgage. Her friends Trina and Lexi came by this morning, but they didn't stay long." Trina and Lexi were Cambria's closest friends and biggest enablers. They were the type of women who lived for gossip and drama as long as it was happening to someone else. Now that Cambria was the subject of scandal rather than the source of it, they'd probably keep their distance. "I want to accelerate the timeline," I said. "Victor's going to try something desperate, and I want to be ready for him." Red nodded. "What did you have in mind?" "Something that will hurt him where he lives, his precious car." Victor was obsessed with his custom Porsche 911, a bright red convertible that he'd had modified with racing stripes and custom wheels. He treated that car like some men treated their children, washing it every weekend and parking it in the most visible spots he could find. It was a symbol of his success and masculinity, which made it the perfect target. That evening, Red and I followed Victor to his usual gym, where he spent 2 hours every Tuesday and Thursday working out with his personal trainer. The gym had a parking garage with limited security cameras, and Victor always parked in the same spot on the 3rd level. We waited until Victor was safely inside the building, then approached his car with the supplies we'd brought: expanding foam, food coloring, and several pounds of biodegradable glitter. The plan was simple: fill the car's exhaust system with expanding foam mixed with blue dye, then cover the exterior with glitter that would stick to the paint without causing permanent damage. "This is juvenile," Red said as we worked. "Sometimes juvenile is exactly what the situation calls for," I replied, carefully inserting the foam applicator into the exhaust pipe. We finished our work and retreated to a safe distance to wait. Victor emerged from the gym 45 minutes later, looking relaxed and confident. That changed the moment he tried to start his car. The expanding foam had completely blocked his exhaust system, causing the engine to stall immediately. When Victor got out to investigate, he discovered the glitter covering his paint job, sparkling under the parking garage lights like a disco ball. His reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Victor screamed, kicked the concrete wall, and spent several minutes cursing at the top of his lungs. Then he called someone, probably a towing company, and began pacing around his ruined car like a caged animal. Red and I watched from the stairwell, recording everything on our phones. This footage would be useful later when we needed to demonstrate Victor's volatile temperament. "He's going to come after you for this," Red warned. "I'm counting on it," I said. The next morning, I received the call I'd been expecting. Victor's voice was tight with controlled rage, but he was trying to sound reasonable. "We need to talk," he said. "Do we?" "This has gone far enough. Whatever you think you know about me and Cambria, you're wrong." "I don't think anything, Victor. I know everything. I have photos, emails, and bank records. I know about the hotels, the restaurants, and the proprietary information you've been stealing from my business." There was a long pause. "Meet me at Eli's shop tonight at 8. Come alone." "Why would I do that?" "Because if you don't, I'm going to make your life very difficult. I have connections in this city, and I can make sure you never work in tech again." I almost laughed. Victor was still trying to play the intimidation game, apparently unaware that I'd been planning for this conversation. 8 o'clock, I agreed. "But Victor, if you're thinking about doing something stupid, remember that I'm not the one with everything to lose." I hung up and called Eli. "We're having company tonight." Eli's shop was perfect for the kind of confrontation I was expecting. It was private, secure, and filled with tools that could be useful if Victor decided to get physical. More importantly, it had excellent acoustics for recording conversations. I arrived early and set up my phone to record everything. Eli positioned himself in the back office where he could see everything but remain out of sight. Red was stationed outside, watching for any surprises Victor might have brought with him. Victor arrived exactly on time, driving a rental car that looked nothing like his usual style. He was dressed casually, jeans and a polo shirt instead of his usual expensive suits, but his body language was still aggressive. "You've made your point," he said without preamble. "Now let's discuss terms." "Terms? What it's going to take for you to back off? Money? A business deal? Name your price." I studied Victor's face, looking for signs of the desperation I knew he must be feeling. His PR firm was in crisis, his wife was divorcing him, and his affair with Cambria was now public knowledge. He was a man with very few options left. "There is no price," I said. "You chose to target my wife and my business. Now you get to live with the consequences." "Your wife came to me," Victor said. "She was unhappy, looking for someone who appreciated her. I just gave her what she wanted. And what she wanted happened to include access to my proprietary technology." Victor's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and played a recording I'd made from one of the emails Red had recovered. It was Victor's voice, clearly identifiable, discussing the technical specifications of my AI security system. "That recording is illegal," Victor said. "Actually, it's not. Washington is a two-party consent state for private conversations, but this was extracted from your company's email server as part of a corporate investigation. Completely legal." Victor realized he'd been outmaneuvered. His face flushed red, and his hands clenched into fists. "You think you're so smart," he said, "but you have no idea what you're dealing with. I can destroy you." "You can try," I said, "but I should warn you. I'm very good at protecting things that matter to me, and right now, what matters most is making sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are." That's when Victor snapped. He lunged forward, swinging wildly at my face. I'd been expecting this. Men like Victor always resorted to violence when they couldn't get their way through intimidation. I stepped aside, letting his momentum carry him past me, then grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and triggered it directly into his face. The chemical foam blinded him temporarily, sending him stumbling backward into a workbench. Eli emerged from the back office, his phone already recording. "I think that's enough excitement for one evening," he said calmly. Victor wiped foam from his eyes, looking around wildly. He was covered in white powder, his hair was disheveled, and his expensive polo shirt was ruined. More importantly, he'd just committed assault on camera. "You set me up," he gasped. "You set yourself up," I replied. "I just gave you the opportunity to show everyone who you really are." Victor stumbled toward the door, still partially blinded by the fire extinguisher foam. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," I said. "You just don't know it yet." After Victor left, Eli and I reviewed the footage. The recording clearly showed Victor initiating the physical confrontation, which would be useful if he tried to press charges. More importantly, it showed him losing control completely, which would damage his reputation even further. "What's next?" Eli asked. "Now, we let the neighborhood gossip machine do its work," I said, "and we prepare for the final phase." The final phase would require careful timing and absolute precision. Victor and Cambria had made their choices, and now it was time for them to face the full consequences of those choices. But first, I needed to make sure they understood exactly what they were up against. I pulled out my phone and sent identical text messages to both Victor and Cambria. "Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., my house. Come alone, or everyone sees everything." It was time to end this. The neighborhood block party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, which gave me exactly 3 days to prepare the most comprehensive public humiliation in suburban Seattle history. The annual event was Marla Goss's pride and joy, a chance for everyone in our development to gather, share gossip, and pretend they actually liked each other. This year's party would be different. I spent Friday morning at Eli's shop, working with Red to compile everything we'd gathered over the past 2 weeks. Photos, recordings, email transcripts, financial documents. We had enough evidence to destroy both Victor and Cambria's reputations permanently. "You sure you want to go nuclear?" Red asked, reviewing our materials. "Once this gets out, there's no taking it back." "They made their choice when they decided to steal from me," I said. "Now they get to live with the consequences." The beauty of our evidence was that it told a complete story. Victor pursuing Cambria not just for romance, but for access to my business secrets. Cambria willingly sharing proprietary information while complaining about feeling controlled in our marriage. Their elaborate deception, their public lies, and their complete lack of remorse for the damage they'd caused. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Seattle weather that would drive the block party into the community center pavilion. The enclosed space was actually perfect for my purposes. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and excellent acoustics for the presentation I'd prepared. I arrived early, ostensibly to help with setup, but actually to position the portable speakers I'd borrowed from Eli's shop. Marla was delighted to have my assistance, especially since my presence guaranteed maximum drama for her event. "I'm so glad you decided to come," she said, arranging folding chairs around the pavilion. "Everyone's been talking about the gala incident." "I imagine they have." Cambria hasn't been seen much since then. Her friends Trina and Lexi came by yesterday, but they seemed distant. This was exactly what I'd expected. Trina and Lexi were social climbers who'd attached themselves to Cambria because she'd seemed successful and well-connected. Now that she was the subject of scandal rather than the source of gossip, they'd be looking for ways to distance themselves. "People show their true colors during difficult times," I said. "Indeed they do," Marla agreed, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. The party officially started at 2 p.m., and by 2:30, most of the neighborhood had gathered in the pavilion. There was the usual mixture of families with children, older couples, and single professionals trying to network their way into Seattle's social hierarchy. Cambria arrived at 3, accompanied by Trina and Lexi, but clearly uncomfortable with the attention she was receiving. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, her designer outfit wrinkled like she'd slept in it. Victor didn't show up, which was probably smart on his part. His presence would have turned the event into a complete circus. I waited until 4 o'clock, when everyone had settled in with their drinks and appetizers, before making my move. I approached the small stage area where Marla usually made her annual HOA announcements. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, tapping the microphone to get attention. "I know this is unusual, but I have something important to share with all of you." The room went quiet. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the chance to hear my side of the story directly from me. Over the past few weeks, many of you have heard rumors about my marriage and my personal life, I continued. Tonight, I want to set the record straight with facts instead of speculation. I nodded to Red, who was positioned near the AV equipment. The first image appeared on the projection screen I'd set up, a photo of Victor and Cambria kissing in a restaurant parking lot. A collective gasp went up from the audience. Several people pulled out their phones to record what was happening. "This is my wife, Cambria, with her boss, Victor Ralston," I said calmly. "This photo was taken 3 weeks ago, while Cambria was telling me she needed more freedom in our marriage." The next slide showed email transcripts. Victor asking Cambria about my work schedule, my current projects, and my client list. But their relationship wasn't just about romance, I continued. Victor was using Cambria to steal proprietary information from my business. Here's the email where he asks her to photograph documents from my home office. More gasps. Someone in the back of the room said, "Oh my God," loud enough for everyone to hear. I looked directly at Cambria, who was sitting frozen in her chair, her face pale with shock. Trina and Lexi had moved slightly away from her, creating physical distance that everyone could see. "Cambria told me she wanted independence," I said. "She wanted the freedom to make her own choices without considering how they affected anyone else, so I gave her exactly what she asked for." The next slide showed bank statements, joint accounts that had been closed, credit cards that had been canceled, and mortgage payments that were now entirely Cambria's responsibility. "Independence means taking responsibility for your own choices," I said. "Cambria is now free to make whatever decisions she wants, and she's free to live with the consequences." The room was completely silent, except for the sound of phones recording everything. This footage would be all over social media within hours. I advanced to the next slide, which showed Victor's custom Porsche covered in glitter and foam. "Victor Ralston threatened to make my life difficult if I didn't cooperate with his demands," I said. "This is what happened to his car the next day." Several people in the audience laughed. The image was ridiculous enough to break some of the tension in the room. Victor then demanded to meet with me privately, where he became violent when I refused to be intimidated. The final video showed Victor attacking me in Eli's shop, followed by his humiliating retreat covered in fire extinguisher foam. "This is the man Cambria chose over our marriage," I said. "A man who steals trade secrets, cheats on his wife, and resorts to violence when he doesn't get his way." I turned off the projector and looked around the room. Every face was staring at me with a mixture of shock, fascination, and respect. I'd just delivered the most comprehensive character assassination in neighborhood history, and I'd done it with nothing but facts. "I want to thank everyone for listening," I said. "And I want to be clear. I don't regret anything that's happened. Cambria and Victor showed me who they really are, and I responded accordingly." I stepped down from the stage and walked toward the exit, but before I could leave, something unexpected happened. The room erupted in applause. It started with just a few people, then spread throughout the pavilion. These weren't people celebrating the destruction of my marriage. They were people who respected the way I'd handled an impossible situation. Marla Goss was practically glowing with excitement. "Orion," she called out, "that was the most educational presentation we've ever had at a block party." I looked back at Cambria one more time. She was still sitting in her chair, but now she was completely alone. Trina and Lexi had moved to the other side of the room, and everyone else was giving her a wide berth. "Cambria," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you got exactly what you asked for." Then I walked out of the pavilion and into the parking lot, where Eli was waiting by my car. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I just took out the trash," I said. But as we drove away, I realized the evening wasn't over yet. My phone was buzzing with calls and messages, including several from numbers I didn't recognize. One of them was Victor, and his voicemail was exactly what I'd expected. "You think this is finished?" his voice said, tight with rage. "You have no idea what you've started. I'm coming for you tonight, and this time I won't make the mistake of fighting fair." I showed the message to Eli. "Looks like we're having company. Your place or mine?" "Mine," I said. "It's time to go home." The smart home system I'd installed in our house, my former house, was more sophisticated than most people realized. Motion sensors, pressure plates, automated locks, cameras in every room, and a central control system that could be operated remotely from my phone. I'd originally designed it for convenience and security, but tonight it would serve a different purpose. Cambria had changed the access codes after I'd moved out, but she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd kept the same system I'd installed, and I'd built several backdoors into the programming that only I knew about. By 7 p.m., I was parked 3 blocks away from the house, watching the security feeds on my laptop while Red monitored the neighborhood from his position across the street. Cambria was inside, pacing frantically through the living room while talking on her phone. "She's been making calls for the past hour," Red reported through our earpieces. "Looks like she's trying to reach Victor." Victor was probably busy dealing with his own crisis. The footage from the block party had already started circulating on social media, and his PR firm would be in full damage control mode. But I knew he'd show up eventually. Men like Victor couldn't resist the opportunity to prove their dominance through violence. At 7:45, Victor's rental car pulled into the driveway. He sat in the car for several minutes, probably psyching himself up for whatever confrontation he was planning. When he finally got out, I could see he was carrying something, a baseball bat from the look of it. "He's armed," Red warned. "Noted," I replied, activating the first phase of my plan. Victor approached the front door and rang the bell. Cambria let him in immediately, and they embraced in the entryway like reunited lovers preparing for battle. It would have been touching if it weren't so pathetic. I waited until they were both inside and settled in the living room before triggering the lockdown sequence. Every door in the house sealed automatically: front door, back door, garage door, even the interior doors between rooms. The windows were already secured with the reinforced glass I'd installed for security purposes. Victor and Cambria were trapped, and they knew it immediately. Through the security cameras, I watched them run to the front door and pull frantically at the handle. "Orion!" Cambria screamed at the camera she'd spotted in the corner. "Let us out of here!" Instead of responding, I activated the sound system and began playing a recording I'd prepared. Cambria's own voice from our argument 2 weeks ago, saying, "I'll wear what I want and text who I want," on an endless loop. The psychological effect was immediate. Cambria covered her ears and began crying, while Victor grabbed his baseball bat and started swinging at the nearest camera. "You want to play games?" Victor shouted. "Fine, let's play!" He smashed the living room camera, but there were 12 others throughout the house, and he couldn't reach most of them. More importantly, every swing of his bat was being recorded from multiple angles. I activated the next phase, the lighting system. Every bulb in the house began strobing in random patterns: bright white, then complete darkness, then colored lights cycling through the spectrum. The effect was disorienting and nauseating, especially combined with the audio loop that was still playing at maximum volume. Victor stumbled through the strobing lights, swinging his bat at anything he could reach. He smashed a lamp, put a hole in the drywall, and shattered the glass coffee table Cambria had insisted on buying last year. "Stop this!" Cambria screamed. "This is crazy!" "You wanted independence," I said through the intercom system. "This is what independence looks like when you betray the people who care about you." Victor found the central control panel in the hallway and began attacking it with his bat. But the system was designed to be tamper-resistant, and the real controls were located in a secure cabinet he'd never find. That's when I triggered the final phase of the trap. The garage door opened automatically, revealing Victor's custom Porsche, the same car we'd filled with glitter and foam earlier in the week. But now it had been modified with additional surprises. I'd spent the afternoon rigging the car with remote-controlled devices, smoke machines, paint dispensers, and a sound system that would broadcast everything happening inside the vehicle to the entire neighborhood. Victor saw his car and ran toward it, probably thinking it was his escape route. He jumped into the driver's seat and tried to start the engine, but I disconnected the battery. Instead of starting, the car became a trap. The smoke machines activated first, filling the interior with thick colored fog. Then the paint dispensers triggered, covering Victor with bright blue latex paint that would take days to wash off. Finally, the sound system activated, broadcasting his screams and curses to everyone within a 3-block radius. Through the security cameras, I watched Victor stumble out of the car, covered in blue paint and coughing from the smoke. He looked like a deranged Smurf, and the image was being recorded from 6 different angles. Neighbors had started gathering in the street, drawn by the noise and the spectacle. Marla Goss was there with her phone, live streaming everything to the neighborhood's social media group. Several teenagers were recording from their own phones, probably uploading to TikTok and Instagram. Victor tried to run, but the blue paint had made him slippery, and he fell face first into the driveway. When he tried to get up, he slipped again, creating a slapstick comedy routine that had the watching crowd laughing and cheering. Meanwhile, Cambria was still trapped inside the house, pounding on the windows and screaming for help. The strobing lights and audio loop were still running, and she looked like she was having a complete breakdown. I decided it was time to make my entrance. I drove to the house and parked across the street, where the growing crowd of neighbors could see me clearly. When I got out of my car, several people applauded. Apparently, my reputation as the wronged husband seeking justice had spread throughout the neighborhood. "Evening, everyone," I said calmly. "Sorry for the disturbance." Marla Goss approached me with her phone still recording. "Orion, this is incredible. How did you do all this?" "Smart home technology," I replied. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you plan ahead." Victor, still covered in blue paint, tried to approach me aggressively, but he slipped again and fell backward into the ornamental shrubs Cambria had planted last spring. "You're insane!" he shouted from the bushes. "I'm calling the police!" "Please do," I said. "I'm sure they'll be very interested in the baseball bat you brought to my house and the property damage you've caused." That's when the police actually did arrive, 3 squad cars responding to noise complaints from neighbors who weren't part of our immediate social circle. But instead of arresting me, they found themselves dealing with Victor, who was covered in paint, wielding a weapon, and had clearly been vandalizing private property. The lead officer, Sergeant Martinez, surveyed the scene with the weary expression of someone who'd seen everything. "Let me guess," she said. "Domestic dispute?" "Not exactly," I replied. "More like trespassing and vandalism. That man broke into my house with a weapon and destroyed several $1,000s worth of property." I showed Sergeant Martinez the security footage on my phone, clear evidence of Victor entering the house with a baseball bat and systematically destroying everything he could reach. "The house is equipped with an automated security system," I explained. "When it detected an intruder with a weapon, it activated lockdown protocols to prevent escape until police could arrive." This wasn't entirely true, but it was plausible enough to satisfy the officer's initial questions. The important thing was that I had video evidence of Victor's crimes, while all he had was accusations about my Excessive security measures. "What about the woman inside?" Sergeant Martinez asked, looking at the house where Cambria was still visible through the windows. "That's my wife," I said. "Soon-to-be ex-wife. She let the intruder into the house, which makes her an accessory to the crimes he committed." I deactivated the security system, and the front door unlocked with a soft click. Cambria stumbled out, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her expensive dress torn from her attempts to break down the door. She looked around at the crowd of neighbors, the police cars, and Victor covered in blue paint, and I could see the exact moment she realized how completely she'd been defeated. "This is all his fault," she said, pointing at me. "He's been harassing us for weeks." "Ma'am," Sergeant Martinez said patiently, "do you live in this house?" "Yes, but—" "And did you invite that man inside?" Cambria looked at Victor, who was being handcuffed by another officer, then back at the sergeant. "Yes, but Orion set us up. He trapped us in there." "In your own house? The house where you live?" Cambria realized the legal problem she was facing. She couldn't claim to be a victim of false imprisonment in her own home, especially when she'd invited Victor inside, and he'd immediately begun destroying property. "This isn't over," she said, looking directly at me. "Yes, it is," I replied. "You got exactly what you asked for." As the police led Victor away and the crowd began to disperse, I stood in the driveway of the house I'd once shared with Cambria, watching her realize that her old life was completely finished. Tomorrow, the videos of tonight's events would be all over social media. Victor would be facing criminal charges for vandalism and trespassing. Cambria would be dealing with the social and financial consequences of her choices, and I would be free to start over, knowing that I'd given them exactly what they deserved. But as I walked back to my car, I realized that Victor's threat from earlier hadn't been empty. Men like him didn't give up easily, and he'd probably try one last desperate move to salvage his reputation and his relationship. I was right. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow, your brother's shop, noon. Come alone, or I start making phone calls to your clients." Victor was making one final play, and this time he was threatening my business directly. It was exactly the kind of escalation I'd been expecting, and I was ready for it. The final confrontation was going to be very satisfying. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of torrential rain that turns Seattle into a gray, waterlogged mess. Perfect weather for ending a war. I spent the early hours at Eli's shop, preparing for what I knew would be Victor's last desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. He'd lost his wife, his business was in ruins, and his affair with Cambria had become neighborhood legend. But men like Victor never accepted defeat gracefully. They always had to try one more scheme, one more threat, one more play for dominance. "You sure you want to do this alone?" Eli asked, checking the security cameras he'd installed around the shop's perimeter. "He specifically said to come alone," I replied. "Besides, I want him to think he has the advantage." Red was monitoring everything from his van parked 2 blocks away, ready to call for backup if things went sideways. But I didn't expect Victor to try anything too dramatic. He was desperate, not suicidal, and he knew that any violence would only make his legal situation worse. At 11:30, I positioned myself in the shop's main work area, surrounded by tools and motorcycle parts that could serve as weapons if necessary. The space was well lit, with multiple camera angles, and I'd made sure to wear a wireless microphone that would broadcast everything to Red's recording equipment. Victor arrived exactly on time, but he wasn't alone. Cambria was with him, looking haggard and desperate in yesterday's clothes. They'd obviously spent the night together, probably planning whatever final gambit they thought would save them. "Orion," Victor said as they entered the shop. "Thank you for coming." He looked terrible. The blue paint was mostly gone, but his hair was still stained, and his expensive clothes had been replaced with a cheap tracksuit that made him look like a has-been athlete. More importantly, his usual confidence was completely gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a man with nothing left to lose. "Victor, Cambria." I nodded to each of them. "What can I do for you?" You can stop this insanity, Cambria said. You've made your point. We get it. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But this has gone too far. Has it? The police, the public humiliation, the financial sabotage, it's enough, she continued. We're willing to make a deal. I almost laughed. After everything they'd done, they still thought this was a negotiation. What kind of deal? Victor stepped forward, trying to regain some of his old authority. We'll disappear, he said. Leave Seattle, start over somewhere else. In exchange, you stop the harassment and delete all the evidence you've collected. And why would I want to do that? Because if you don't, Victor said, pulling out his phone, I'm going to call every one of your clients and tell them you're unstable. I'll claim you've been stalking me, threatening my family, and using illegal surveillance methods to gather information. He showed me his phone screen, which displayed a contact list with the names and numbers of my biggest clients. I'll destroy your reputation the same way you've destroyed mine, he continued. By the time I'm finished, no one in this city will hire you for anything. It was exactly the kind of threat I'd expected. Petty, vindictive, and ultimately self-destructive. Victor was so focused on hurting me that he couldn't see how his plan would backfire. That's an interesting strategy, I said, but I think you're forgetting something important. What's that? I have evidence of everything you've done. Corporate espionage, adultery, vandalism, trespassing. It's all documented and ready to be released. If you start making phone calls about me, I'll start making phone calls about you. Victor's face flushed red. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled out my own phone and showed him a video file labeled Victor Ralston, Complete Evidence Package. The file was over 2 hours long and contained everything Red and I had collected over the past 3 weeks. This video includes your affair with my wife, your attempts to steal my trade secrets, your violent assault at this very location, and your destruction of private property last night, I said. It's currently stored on 12 different servers with automatic release triggers if anything happens to me or my business. Victor stared at the phone screen, realizing that his threats were worthless. But instead of backing down, he did exactly what I'd expected. He snapped. You think you're so smart, he snarled, lunging forward with his fists raised. But this time, I was ready for him. Instead of dodging, I stepped into his attack and grabbed his wrist, using his own momentum to spin him around and slam him face first into the workbench behind me. Victor bounced off the metal surface and staggered backward, his nose streaming crimson and his eyes unfocused. He tried to swing again, but his coordination was gone, and I easily sidestepped his wild punch. Stay down, Victor, I warned. You're embarrassing yourself. Instead of listening, he grabbed a wrench from the workbench and raised it over his head like a club. That's when I decided the conversation was over. I stepped forward and slapped him across the face with everything I had. The sound echoed through the shop like a gunshot, and Victor dropped the wrench as he stumbled sideways into a stack of motorcycle tires. That's for my marriage, I said. Victor tried to get up, but I slapped him again, harder this time, sending him sprawling across the concrete floor. That's for my business. Cambria screamed and tried to help Victor to his feet, but he was too dazed to stand properly. His nose was broken, his lip was split, and there was a growing bruise on his left cheek that would take weeks to heal. You're insane, Cambria sobbed. Both of you are insane. No, I said, looking down at Victor as he struggled to focus his eyes. I'm just giving people exactly what they deserve. That's when the shop door opened and Colin Ralston walked in, followed by her teenage son Tara and 2 men in expensive suits who were obviously lawyers. Victor, Colin said calmly, I've been looking for you. Victor looked up at his wife with the expression of a man who just realized his situation had gotten infinitely worse. Colin, I can explain. No need, she interrupted. I've seen the videos. Everyone has seen the videos. She was right. The footage from last night's confrontation had gone viral on neighborhood social media, and local news stations were already picking up the story. Victor's humiliation was now public entertainment. I brought the divorce papers, Colin continued, handing Victor a thick envelope. And a restraining order. You're not allowed within 500 feet of me, our son, or our house. Victor tried to stand, but his legs weren't working properly yet. You can't do this to me. I'm your husband. You were my husband, Colin corrected. Now you're just a man who destroyed his life for a cheap affair and a failed business scheme. She turned to Cambria, who was still kneeling beside Victor on the concrete floor. And you, Colin said, her voice filled with contempt. I hope he was worth it. Cambria started to respond, but Colin held up her hand. Don't, she said. Nothing you could say would matter now. One of the lawyers stepped forward and handed me a business card. Mr. Vanton, Mrs. Ralston would like to thank you for providing the evidence that made this divorce possible. If you need any legal assistance with your own proceedings, please don't hesitate to call. I looked down at Victor, who was finally managing to sit upright against the motorcycle tires. His face was swollen, his clothes were dirty, and his eyes held the hollow look of a man who'd lost everything that mattered to him. Victor, I said, crouching down so we were at eye level, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how it feels to lose everything because you got greedy and stupid. Victor tried to speak but only managed a weak groan. You had a successful business, a beautiful wife, and a good life, I continued. But it wasn't enough. You wanted more, so you decided to steal from me. You used my wife, violated my trust, and threatened my livelihood. I stood up and looked around the shop, at Colin and her lawyers, at Cambria sobbing on the floor, at Victor bleeding and broken among the motorcycle tires. This is what happens when you take things that don't belong to you, I said. You lose everything that does. The lawyers helped Colin collect Victor and escort him out of the shop. Cambria followed, still crying, but she paused at the door and looked back at me. I never meant for any of this to happen, she said. Yes, you did, I replied. You meant every bit of it. You just didn't think about the consequences. After they left, I stood alone in Eli's shop, surrounded by the tools and machinery that represented honest work and genuine accomplishment. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean and preparing the city for whatever came next. My phone buzzed with a text from Red. It's over. Victor's business partners just released a statement disavowing any connection to him. His PR firm is finished. I typed back, Good. What about Cambria? Her friends have completely cut her off. Word is she's moving back in with her parents in Portland. I smiled. Trina and Lexi, the social climbers who'd encouraged Cambria's affair, had abandoned her the moment she became a liability instead of an asset. It was exactly what I'd expected from people like them.